Okay, Tom, now that I've read your essay, I'm going to give you some feedback. And of course, if you don't understand something, just stop and rewind and listen again. Everything in yellow are things that I want you to think about, and we're going to go through them one by one. First of all, throughout your paper, you have some issues of this, the run-on sentence. So, for example, is being emotional a good or a bad thing? That's itself an own question, and then you have it as a verb. So this whole thing is a subject, which doesn't make sense. So you kind of have a run on here. And then here, where you have a comma, I would put a period. And when I went back and looked at your paper, it looks like this is actually your thesis. So I don't know why it's here, because when I got down here, I thought you were going to write an argumentative paper about how you have to control your emotions. But it sounds like really you're writing a paper about why being emotional is bad. Now, I must say, logically, there are some holes in your thoughts here. So I think you can improve this paper by actually trying to make the thesis that you have here be what you argue, ways that you have to control your emotions. So um, we'll go through it piece by piece, but I'll go ahead and make that first comment. Um, this should be wise, not wide. And here you need to think about whether you're going to use you or one. Sometimes you use the word one, and then other times you use the word you. You need to pick one and use that throughout the paper, not switch back and forth, okay? So, you've got this quote from Oscar Wilde, that's good, but, excuse me, you don't need to mention he's gay. I don't think that it has anything to do with what his quote is about, unless you're trying to say that being gay is a negative emotion, and um, yeah, that's not going to work, especially in a Western academic context, where there's a lot of science that talks about how sexual preference is not an emotion. If you're talking about other negative emotions, what research do you have? How do you know that he abandoned negative emotions? Um, so what I see in this quote is that he wants to be able to control emotions, not that he doesn't want to abandon. I mean, yeah, maybe abandon negative emotions, but not all emotions. So it's confusing for me when I read this and you say being an emotional man, I think a person who has all sorts of emotions, both negative and positive. But then you're arguing that you have to abandon negative ones. So immediately I see a gap in the logic because, of course, we should not follow negative emotions, but that doesn't mean we have to also abandon positive ones. Um, and that's what you're arguing when you say that someone is an emotional man. Now, being emotional does not just mean negative emotions. So you have some work to do in trying to clean up what you're really trying to argue. So you have this example about a guy who gets upset, and so he has an argument, and he's angry, so it may cause him to lose not my job, but his job. Um, so yeah, this is a guy that can't control his emotions. You're on the other hand, those kind of men who are not so emotional. Again, it's not that you're either emotional or you're out of control. I don't think those are opposites, and your argument is not very convincing by putting either you don't have any emotion or you're crazy and negative and you don't know what you're doing. There's a lot of things in between those two. So again, being an emotional man may hurt others' feelings, Well, not being an emotional man, being a rude, aggressive man may hurt other people's feelings. So I think you need to figure out what you're going to do about this idea of emotional man. It's not going to work for you. Okay, capitalize wiki, and um, here you have this wiki how article, and again, you're talking about negative feelings, which might make people feel uncomfortable. Okay, again, still got the main problem. Another problem you've got here, though, is you say unleash, unleash, unleash. What does unleash mean? Are you able to express this in another way? You also use it up here. You're too repetitive, and I think you could do a better job in this section of explaining this and doing it in your own words. Okay. So you go back to this last example. He didn't finish. He didn't. I think it would be better to say if he didn't finish, then I don't know. I'm confused about this example because in the first paragraph, it sounds like just a possible person, not a real person. And in this paragraph, it sounds like this is a real example that happened. So, again, the man who can control his emotions may think about that result. Okay. I feel like you're arguing two different things. You're arguing that people have to control their emotions, as well as arguing that men shouldn't have emotions. And then I also think, well, if emotions are bad, then why should women have them either? There's definitely a big gap in the logic that you have to sort out before you can feel like this paper is convincing. Okay, let's keep moving on. Candid is an adjective. You need a noun here. So because of, and then you need a noun. I had no idea what you're really trying to say here. So I get your topic sentence that you think emotional people can be exploited easily, but why? Why would people who envy people who why if emotional people are negative, why would people envy them and pretend to be their friends so they can frame them? Those people sound like psychopaths, and I don't think that that's quite normal behavior. I mean, I know lots of emotional people, and I'm not trying to like get them into trouble. I don't know. This to me this doesn't make sense. If you have a really personal example of this, then you should be more personal because I have I have no experience with anyone acting like this. So this idea that being emotional is not a wise choice because it means your thoughts will be exploited, not exploded, exploited to others, and this is not good for your career. Well, I still am not convinced why it's not good that people can see your thoughts or know what you're thinking. You haven't really convinced me of that, especially not here. Okay, in your counter argument, yeah, opponents would say that emotional is the best thing. And this is a nice quote. And a good explanation here. However, uh, you don't need to go into who Helen Keller is. But more importantly, I don't know how there only being one Helen Keller makes her quote untrue. There was only one Oscar Wilde as well. So, following the same logic that you have in this part, is that, well, we can't trust what Oscar Wilde says either, because he was living his own lifestyle and had his own negative emotions or whatever you thought there. So I really want you to rethink your rebuttal. This rebuttal does not convince me at all. Um, and I definitely don't think that many people would agree with you that most emotions are negative. There are lots of happy emotions or positive emotions or even emotions that are neutral. So you're losing credibility when you make these kinds of really strong statements that people would not agree with. And again, just because Helen Keller had a special, extraordinary life doesn't mean that her thoughts on emotions um, are not valid, especially because if her life was so difficult, you'd think that she would have a lot of negative emotions. And indeed, if you know much about her life, she did have negative emotions, but she also had positive ones. So, I have a big problem with this idea right here. Being an emotional man is not such a good choice. You haven't convinced me of that. What you have convinced me of is that people need to control negative emotions. Not just men, but people in general. So, I would say you have some work to do on this essay with trying to make your paper actually convincible. And that's where you need to drop the idea that all emotions are bad and that men shouldn't have them, because you are not able to prove to me that it's okay for women to have emotions but men not, and that being emotional is inherently bad. All you've proven to me is that losing control of negative emotions is bad. Got it?